Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to my broadcast. No, this is my channel. No, just call it the YouTube channel of Big Brother Week. Now, I have another request from a young man that goes by the name of Fatal Death SG45. Now, he actually made a statement on my channel comments about a topic as I agree with, and he said this. I'm not sure if you've done a topic on this, but it's one that kind of bothers me. Why are many video games always portraying Russia as the antagonist? Granted, I don't know what Russia's up to these days, and I understand the Cold War scenarios and whatnot, but still, Russia as the enemy is bothering me to be honest. Either game companies should make up a fictional country or make up a different scenario altogether. Killing Russia in first-person shooters can only go so far. So I guess the real question is, why exactly do they have a lot of Russians being portrayed as bad guys? Well, from my personal knowledge in the video game industry, I really haven't seen a great number of war-based games as of late that really portrays Russians for the most part as being villains. I mean, if you look at World War II, first-person shooter or war-based games, you often see enemies that either have more Germanic or German-like characteristics or features or attitudes, which portrays them completely on a very negative light because of that particular part in time. And is pretty much pivotal in many respects. Now, granted, it's also not just the idea of the Cold War if you want to put it in more contemporary standards. Russia is basically the idea of the United States versus Russia still. And it's more to do with the fact that political ideologies tend to clash with one another. If you remember the Cold War, and even to this day, you still have people that look at Russia as being a completely communist country or viewed as such. And, quite frankly, it's the typical American attitude that generally speaks on so many volumes in so many ways. So, of course, they have to create some kind of means of saying that we still have certain kinds of villains. Now, of course, one of the most guilty people would probably be Tom Clancy and his series involving the former Soviet Union being portrayed as villains, as what have you, on many of the themes that he actually revolves around when it comes to national security. Basically, my personal opinion about my personal take on the whole matter is that I don't think there's a great number of Russians being portrayed as enemies in video games nowadays as much as we see a montage of German, Asian, or even American forces or what have you that are basically going up against one another either as terrorists or what have you. But it's always stuck within that particular mind frame. Oh, and to further add, quite frankly, in my personal opinion, I have nothing against Russia. I speak the language too, and quite frankly, it is very disturbing in some cases that people still like to reminisce about the past, about how Russia has always been the evil people because of the idea of a political ideology that's different from theirs. When in fact the United States had its own problems in terms of their own particular form of political ideology and government. They never practiced what they preach. At least with certain elements of communism, there were people who actually were treated as equals, or if not, were treated as people of equal footing. It's just that propaganda took great shape and took great form, not just in the United States, but also in Russia as well, or the former Soviet Union as a whole. But needless to say, though, it's always going to be a war between the East and the West, whether you're talking about political structure or political means. But nowadays, though, the relationship between modern-day Russia and the United States have improved a little, but there's still a long way to go on both ends. Of course, recently, back in December, they actually signed the START 2 treaty. This is kind of interesting, though, because we're talking about a political topic on a video game channel. But it's pertinent to your question, and I really hope I was able to answer that. But needless to say, though, you shouldn't really be too worried about that because they do have enemies of all different fronts. However, it is kind of ironic in some cases that it's more focused on the idea of Russians as opposed to, say, Arabs, who are currently considered to be the enemy of the United States because of the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan. Well, the war in Iraq has actually ended last year, technically. But needless to say, though, we still have a long way to go. And world relations are still going to be relatively difficult to manage. So I say to you and to everyone else who's watching this video, Bear in mind that these video games should not allow you to develop such vitriol or hatred against another country, but rather what it should do is reinforce that creativity and ingenuity still exist. But at the same time, we have to realize that if you want to do historical events, you'll have to look at it from that particular context at that time, not necessarily from the secret messages that you're trying to come together with. Anyway, what is your take on the whole matter? Do you think there's too many war-based games that actually include too many people of all different other parts, not just Russia? And should there be some kind of, do you think that war-based games or games in general should actually have more fantasy-like settings and fantasy-like enemies? Sound off on your take. Thank you.